China just dropped a bombshell on one of America's biggest companies. All Boeing orders have been canceled. In their place, Beijing signed a massive deal with Airbus, 500 new planes worth tens of billions, and a message as clear as it's strategic. The U.S. is no longer China's first choice. And it happened while Trump was still trying to mend ties with Beijing. For Boeing, this may be the most devastating blow in its history, but the damage runs deeper than a lost contract. Behind the headline is a broader shift. China is moving its money, trade, and trust away from the United States. And while Washington talks tough about bringing jobs back home, many American factories remain idle. Grand promises were made. Now, the cracks are showing. This isn't just about airplanes. It's about power, leverage, and the future of global trade. Because if China no longer needs America, the real question is, can America withstand the fallout? While Trump posed for cameras and talked diplomacy, Beijing was finalizing a deal that sent shockwaves through Washington and Wall Street. The Bank of China officially canceled its remaining orders from Boeing, America's aviation giant, and publicly pivoted to Airbus, Boeing's European rival. The scale of the purchase, up to 500 aircraft, was matched only by its timing. It landed just as Trump was preparing for what he hoped would be a diplomatic breakthrough with Xi Jinping, aiming to restart trade talks after years of turbulence. But China sent a different message. They haven't forgotten the trade war or the 145% tariffs slapped on their exports. And now they're responding, not with threats, but with cold, calculated economic action. For Beijing, this is diplomacy with teeth. For Boeing, it's a staggering loss. Back in 2017, China accounted for roughly 25% of Boeing's global deliveries. But after the 737 MAX disasters, persistent supply chain issues, and rising political tensions, the relationship soured quickly. By 2023, Boeing delivered just one aircraft to China. Now, that door has slammed shut entirely. The Airbus deal could be worth more than $50 billion, depending on the mix of narrow and wide-body jets. That's not just revenue Boeing will miss. It's work that won't reach U.S. factories, paychecks that won't go to mechanics, engineers, or suppliers. It's jobs that may never return. While Boeing stumbles, Airbus is soaring. Its stock jumped nearly 6% on the news as investors read the deal not just as a business win, but a strategic realignment. And Boeing isn't the only one watching. American corporate giants are now looking over their shoulders, wondering if they're next. This collapse in Boeing's position didn't happen overnight, but now it's accelerating. Just a few years ago, China represented 1 in every 4 Boeing aircraft deliveries. The company had strong ties with Chinese airlines and regulators and held a major foothold in one of the world's fastest-growing aviation markets. That dominance is now gone. By 2023, from more than 190 aircraft delivered in 2017, Boeing had sent just 1 to China. It wasn't just about politics. 737 MAX safety concerns, regulatory hurdles, and stalled certifications all played a role. But with this sweeping cancellation and Airbus securing China's future fleet, Boeing's path back now looks nearly impossible. The numbers paint a bleak picture. More than 1,100 Airbus planes are currently flying in China, and over 500 more are on order. Boeing? Just 160 in operation, and a dwindling backlog. That's not competition, it's a rout. And each lost order isn't just a number on a spreadsheet. It means fewer shifts at American factories, slower assembly lines, shrinking supplier contracts, and uncertainty in towns and cities across the U.S. The stakes couldn't be higher. China's aviation market is projected to purchase more than 8,000 aircraft by 2040, worth over $1 trillion. If Boeing is locked out, that massive capital won't flow to Seattle, Wichita, or Charleston. It'll go to Toulouse, fueling European industry for decades. Markets have already responded. Airbus shares climbed on the news. Boeing's barely budged, signaling investor doubt in any meaningful rebound. This isn't just a corporate setback. It's a reshaping of global industrial power. And as China strengthens its ties with Europe, American companies are waking up to the risk that Boeing's loss may be the first in series. Because Boeing isn't just an aircraft manufacturer. It's a pillar of the American economy. Over 140,000 workers are employed directly, with hundreds of thousands more tied into its sprawling supply chain, maintenance hubs, and airport operations. When the orders dry up, the pain hits far beyond executive suites. It hits welders in Kansas, machinists in South Carolina, technicians in Washington state. It means fewer hours, smaller paychecks, or no work at all. And with China freezing new orders and redirecting its business to Airbus, the ripple effects are growing. Production lines are slowing. Suppliers are trimming staff. Smaller firms making landing gear, avionics, and cabin systems are losing contracts. One major cancellation can echo across dozens of companies in multiple states. And the bigger fear? This may be just the first domino. If China is willing to freeze out Boeing, who's next? U.S. heavyweights like Apple, Tesla, Ford, and GM all rely heavily on Chinese consumers and factories. If relations worsen, Beijing could quietly delay product approvals, increase local taxes, or steer consumer demand toward domestic brands. And most American companies can't easily pivot away. China accounts for roughly 20% of Tesla's global revenue. For Apple, it's not just a massive consumer market. It's also the heart of its iPhone supply chain. Walking away from China would mean crippling losses, higher costs, and massive logistical disruption. This is no longer just a trade dispute. It's a battle over global influence and economic resilience. The United States once held the upper hand through innovation, market dominance, and integrated supply chains. But that advantage is fading. Boeing's downfall in China is more than a business story. It's a warning. Now, China is flexing its economic muscle, and Boeing's loss is only the beginning. As the aviation giant reels, the rest of corporate America is waking up to a hard truth. The cost of underestimating China's response may be far higher than anyone expected. For years, U.S. companies have promised to bring jobs back home. It's a message that plays well on the campaign trail. Flags waving, workers cheering, headlines celebrating a supposed manufacturing revival. But once the cameras shut off, the reality looks very different. Most factories never returned. Many never left in the first place. Instead, corporations doubled down on overseas production, quietly expanding operations in China, India, Vietnam, and Mexico. Why? Because the math doesn't lie. The average U.S. manufacturing wage tops $5,900 per month before healthcare, insurance, and union benefits are factored in. In China, it's around $1,100. In Vietnam, closer to $400. That means U.S. labor can be 6 to 10 times more expensive, depending on the product. And it's not just about wages. U.S. manufacturers face strict environmental rules, safety codes, zoning laws, and higher land and energy costs. Permits can take months to secure. In contrast, Chinese factories benefit from generous subsidies for electricity, land, and even raw materials. Many operate in state-funded industrial parks, fully integrated and ready to scale. Logistics are another key advantage. In China, cities like Shenzhen are designed for high-speed manufacturing and shipping. Entire supply chains are vertically integrated, shaving days off production. In the U.S., component makers, assemblers, and logistics hubs are often spread across several states. Delays mount. Costs soar. Big brands understand this well. Apple's 2012 pledge to manufacture Macs in the U.S. made headlines, but the reality was small, temporary, and largely symbolic. The iPhones, iPads, and MacBooks stayed overseas. Today, Apple is investing billions in India, not America. Ford and GM still source major parts from China. Nike and Levi's continue to operate in Bangladesh and Cambodia. These companies aren't being dishonest. They're managing optics. The promise of reshoring plays well politically, but the economics remain brutal. And as tensions rise between Washington and Beijing, these same corporations may soon face a choice. Stay where the profits are, or finally follow through on promises they've made for over a decade. Meanwhile, the U.S. government has quietly made it even easier for corporations to keep those promises unfulfilled. The American Competitiveness Act was originally billed as a turning point, a law that would provide government support only to companies that invested in American workers and factories. But by the time the bill passed, its teeth were gone. The requirements were stripped out. Now, Companies can qualify for tax breaks, subsidies, and incentives even if they expand operations abroad. A factory built in Vietnam or Mexico can still earn millions in U.S. taxpayer support. That's not a loophole. It's an invitation to keep offshoring. The results are clear. Despite rising tariffs, record corporate profits, and generous federal incentives, reshoring is actually slowing down. According to the Reshoring Initiative, new U.S. manufacturing job announcements in early 2025 fell nearly 30% compared to the same period in 2023. These choices aren't being made in secret. Lawmakers know the consequences, and yet many continue to back policies that make it easier, not harder, to offshore American jobs. So the question practically asks itself, were they ever serious about rebuilding U.S. industry? Or were the speeches and bills just window dressing, an illusion of action while the real money flowed offshore? The gap between what's promised and what's delivered is widening, and it's American workers left holding the bag. For decades, China's economy was heavily dependent on exports, especially to the U.S. That era is ending. In 2025, just 2 to 3% of total revenue for publicly listed Chinese companies comes from the United States. Once a lifeline, America is now a footnote. China has spent years preparing for this moment. It expanded trade across Asia, Africa, Latin America, and the Middle East. It grew its domestic tech sector, ramped up state support for strategic industries, and built a strong internal consumer base. Today, China no longer needs American buyers to drive growth. The numbers are stark. In April 2025, Chinese exports to the U.S. dropped 21% year over year. By the end of the year, they're projected to fall by up to 77%. That's not a slowdown, that's a collapse. And yet, Beijing isn't panicking. It's pivoting. Over 65% of China's GDP now comes from internal demand, fueled by a rising middle class, government incentives, and increasing incomes. Chinese firms are focusing more on domestic sales and expanding across the global south, where demand is rising and political risks are lower. Meanwhile, the U.S. is facing a hard new reality. What happens when your biggest rival no longer needs you? Tariffs lose their sting when the other side has already moved on. Trade threats ring hollow when leverage is gone. And now, as U.S. exporters face shrinking demand and rising uncertainty, a new era is dawning. One where China has successfully decoupled. The question is, can America survive not being needed? China no longer depends on American consumers. But U.S. companies, from tech to agriculture, still depend heavily on access to China's markets. That imbalance is growing, and so is the risk. As China builds a future without the U.S., the cracks in America's economic foundation are starting to show. What happens when the tables turn? When your biggest competitor stops relying on you, but you still rely on them? That's the question now confronting Washington, Wall Street, and millions of American workers caught in the middle. Subscribe now, because the next chapter in this global economic war is already unfolding.